Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month's theme is building a home, which can mean many different things for a lot of people during this time of year. We had the same theme last year. I felt it was important as in the States, we're entering the holiday season, but also near the end of the year, wherever you are at, a lot of times, this could be a time of coming together. This also means for those, unfortunately, it can mean an extra placemat of a family member that's not no longer with us. It can mean a loud silence for a lost relationship or something that is no longer there. So maybe you're one of the people who are left behind. It also can mean a fresh start for those trying to move forward, and a painful reminder, and it can be a painful reminder of what no longer exists. However you look at it, sometimes when we look at the holidays, it can be difficult. But I'd like to think about it also as an opportunity to find healing in whatever communities you are in, and maybe being brave enough to ask for help. It's especially hard for those who are, as we are adults, we tend to have difficulties getting there. But today we have a new guest. Her name is Amy Taylor. Thank you for so much for coming on and sharing your insight and just being part of the discussion.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Just want to give a quick disclaimer for those who, if you are in crisis, just like that I encourage you to seek professional help immediately. 988 is a suicide crisis lifeline. It's available in the States, but wherever you are around the world, I do encourage you to find what resources they are, even what communities, just ask someone, ask for help, especially if you need it. I've been trying to, because I know there's people who listen to me from other countries, so I've been doing this suicide hotline from different countries. So in Finland, it's we're looking at the world. When we think about these concepts, they're not just us in the States. Sometimes that we kind of forget that we shrink the world a little bit. But in Finland, the emergency line is 112. Suicide hotline is 010-195-202. France is 112 is emergency, but the suicide hotline is 145-394-000. Thank you again, Amy, for coming on. I always start with people who said things better than I did. And we're going back all the way to Confucius. And he said it this way: the strength of a nation derives from the integrity of the home. What comes to mind when you hear this? Anything pop up or anything you want to share?
I just think that home is where you're supposed to feel safe and comfortable and be able to be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody can do that, but luckily I've been able to do that. I have a great family I came from, and I've got a daughter now who I have to share with her dad, but we split the holidays, and
Mm-hmm.
he takes her in the evening and I take her in the afternoon and morning. So, and I've got my son who is now grown, and he has his own family, and they have to split their time between our house and his wife's family. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely got some balls in the air that I'm trying to juggle, but it's still home.
Yeah, it is still home. Whenever I think about, especially as holidays is also split in time. You're right. I have my wife's family, my family, and my parents are no longer together, so they have their um, spouses. So it's like you're kind of splitting everything together. However, it's still home because a lot of times home is the people you surround yourself with, the people. I find that even true. Like I like to remind people, and a lot of people do know, but I know the title Revive Ministries sometimes denote more of a. But this is more of an outreach, and when I think about home, when I think about church, because that's where that's where I was a church leader, is more of the people. I always remember the people. They're really what made it for me. It's a lot of times everything else kind of dilutes it. So when I think about family in the same regard, it's about the people. It's about them. You know, you can have this artwork that looks a monstrosity to other people, but it's like from third grade from your son or daughter, and you're like, this is the best thing ever. So it's just a reminder of how we see and define things. And speaking of, um, I, I think I want to ask you how in the concept of home and how we define home, and sometimes we look at there's deeper ideas of it. How do you improve an environment, especially if sometimes there's some life happens. You have losses, maybe, and losses come in different shapes and forms. So I'm gonna ask you, you know, how important is it to create a positive home, and what has helped you to remember its importance because it's so busy that it becomes less helpful. But how do you be intentional in becoming making that a vocal point when it comes to the home environment?
Well, I have to be very intentional because I think you're aware I have bipolar disorder, and my daughter is autistic and has ADHD, and so if we are not taking care of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
then we can start to argue a little bit. So we have to be very intentional and make sure we're staying, doing self-care
Mm-hmm.
routines,
Mm-hmm.
and that we're being understanding of each other, that during the holidays it can get stressful. You can think it has to be the perfect day, and one thing goes wrong and you think the day is ruined.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. You can get back, start over. It's a fresh start whenever you want it to be.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that. A lot of times I get frustrated. The emotion could be justified, but the reaction not so much. A lot of times, well, I could be frustrated of traffic. This time of year it could be many different things. And I work. I believe you work in the mental health field. I work in the mental health field too. And if you're not careful, burnout is really real. If you're really not careful, kind of setting those boundaries, but also, in the concept of self care, I think that's a very important topic when you think about home, and I'm thinking about building a positive environment. It's how do we break the cycle of saying, I'm hurt, because a lot of times in the field, like the people who experience abuse, unfortunately, can become the abuser themselves if they don't self care, find a way to break the cycle. Obviously, there's a lot of different methods and treatments, but I'm just talking about in the general concept of home. When we emphasize self care, I feel a lot of times we don't put much emphasis to it. We're like, I'm doing, we got food, shelter, but there's different needs. The general needs, a lot of times we could obviously see, but there's other more intangible needs that may be specific. So, like for me, I had I have mental health issues right out of the military, trying to figure out navigate, obviously in and out. Like I'm fine without medication, with medication. Everyone's context is different, but one thing I learned was if it takes me 30, if I know I was going to have a bad day or like it was a stressful day, it starts off with that day that way. I I allow myself the 30 minutes I need or 5 minutes I need. It's I ask my clients I see daily, are you allowed to get better? It's a weird concept, but are you allowed to get better? And that means, are you allowed to practice some of these self-care routines? So I do appreciate you mentioning that. Any other things you want to add to that, or anything you want to say?
Well, yeah, I think that communication is also something that has to be open, and people need to know that they're safe to talk about what they need to. I
Mm,
know my daughter, if I'm having a bad day and I kind of gruff at her, she feels very comfortable because I've raised her that way to say, Mom, you're kind of getting grouchy.
hmm. Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
take a step back and go, oh, yeah, you're right.
Hmm.
And I do the same thing for her sometimes. So I think, you have to have open lines of communication within your family.
Yeah, I think that sometimes I'm I'm pretty much the mouthpiece in my between me and my my wife. So sometimes when I'm not talking or I'm quiet, my wife's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I just need to process a second." And I
Hmm.
explained to her, I need a little, I need a couple minutes. I'll be fine because I kind of know this will pass. This shall pass, but maybe it's something that's I'm kind of get stuck on, or I just need a few minutes to breathe. Practice some focused breathing, or just something that. And a lot of times, the reaction, if I'm reminded of it, practice it. It's like a habit for me, at least for my. It becomes something like, oh yeah, this is happening again. Remember, this is happening again. Um, Pause. So like the communication, like you mentioned, is very important. So my wife was like, he's not talking. Is everything okay? Yes, everything's okay. I just need a moment. So that kind of
Right.
thing. So I think even those little subtle like things that you think, oh, obviously I need a moment. The intentionality is to voice it, to explain. I need a moment. It's not you. I'm not upset at anything. I just need a moment. And especially when you come, you know, that's how I try to set those boundaries coming back from work, dealing with clients in different populations. You're like, you know what? It was a rough day. Things didn't go the way I wanted. You're trying
Right.
to work with resources that are not there. So you're like trying the best you can, but then you come back, moment, and then you move on. And it's not a perfect science, obviously. For me, I keep learning, but one thing I learned also, I don't know about you, I learned that even though I might be very insightful, or I might be going through some like, you know, getting some perspective that might be helpful, but it doesn't replace sleep. so, so, so there's all that understanding of kind of, there's you're not going to solve everything in one day.
Right.
Some things will take parts. Part one, part two, three, part four, and that also goes with communication with not only yourself and understanding yourself, but with others, especially family members. I don't
Well,
know.
oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. It's so great that your wife actually asked you, "Are you okay?" and that kind of thing, because she could just come up with things in her head and think you're mad and then let that get to the
Yeah,
day. I mean, I know during the holidays, people get up really early and start cooking that turkey, and by the time you're eating, they're exhausted.
yeah,
And
yes,
so you have to give people grace.
exactly. And I feel sometimes if we're not careful, we can kind of see things. We're saying we're seeing the visual exterior of what's happening, but we're looking at it through our lens, through our context. If we're not being careful, sometimes they're pretty off. A lot of
Oh,
times we
yeah.
got to ask ourselves. We don't know their concept. We may be upset and we may say, "Oh, this is not right," but the fact of the matter is, we don't know them. Give them if you give give them grace, give yourself grace, pause a moment. A lot of times we just kind of rush in. I think even just giving ourselves a little time, especially during this time of year, it can be difficult. One person that I find interesting, that I read his works before, but I never got this excerpt that I thought was intriguing from this author, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. He says, in family life, love is the oil that eases friction, the cement that binds closer together, and the music that brings harmony. I just like that throughout that he understood also the importance of family. He understood the
Yes.
importance of the the concept of having a safe place at home. And you mentioned safe place. I feel for me it's very subtle when I know things are going well in the sense of family. Is I'm excited to get home for no particular reason, no reason at all. Not like we're having this great like rest. No, just to go home. It's like when you have that, even not like exaggerated excitement. It's just like, get to go home finally. That kind of thing. And
Right.
I feel that's a positive, but it doesn't come out of nowhere. I encourage, as we talk about home, it comes on a lot of conversations that could be long winded. Could be, and understanding each other, and then that comes with any friendship, family, whatever dynamic. So relationships are hard work.
Oh, yeah.
Friendships, any relationships that you're in, and it takes a bit of time to get through that. And I want to, and it's something that doesn't get any, like, you don't actually arrive anywhere. You just continue. It keeps changing as we keep changing. And I think that's the beauty of it, because sometimes it gets overwhelming if we think there's a certain milestone when it comes to relationships. It just changes. We change. Life events changes. Life, all that good stuff. But change can be stressful, as you know. Holidays can be hard for some. What have you learned in maintaining a positive, like, we talk about home, but like, how do you stay connected and like intentionally with your family, friends? Any lessons that you feel you would like to share with those listening through your experience? You mentioned your daughter with autism. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the barriers you might be facing to kind of communicate or connect or understand, especially if you have a long day at work or just a long day period.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you want to share?
Well, I just think that what I've learned over the years, I do have family that are really friends of mine, but they've
Mm-hmm.
become family.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get older and you said things change, you kind of lose touch. And so I've become really good at reaching out to people, whether it be on Facebook Messenger or text messages or just a phone call here and there. But I check in. I have my regular friends and family that I check in on regularly and make sure they're okay.
I remember one of my guests a couple months ago. I love what he said. He said, I would call sometimes my friends, because now, like he says, we're talking about communication and how hard it is. And we even talked about how you could be a great pianist or a musician, right? But people will just assume you know that you're good at it. No, you don't. You don't. Or maybe you're a good support or a friend that is. But this guest told me he would call these people and say to them, "I appreciate you for this. Like, I appreciate what you do. You do a really good job." And he does it because he feels a lot of times the assumption is that they know, just because maybe they're inherently good or talented. I would I would second that. They don't know. A lot of people don't know that you actually notice these things, and it could be very quiet and hollowing if you're really going through something. Maybe you're really talented and whatever creativity, or maybe you're really good at work or very punctual, very just a go-getter, but no one tells you that you're just kind of
Right.
lost in the sea and the go-getter. And then later on you're like, people are like, oh yeah, you only hear in passing but not directly. So I thought that concept was good, to be intentional. He said that helps him stay connected with his
Mm-hmm.
friends and family. And I finding what works for you. I think that's good. I like to switch gears, Amy, and a lot of times with new guests, old guests, old guests being returning a guest, I'd like to give an opportunity to have them share a little bit about themselves, especially for those maybe new. You're new to the podcast, so anything that you feel comfortable sharing. What brought you to where you're at right now? The floor is yours.
Okay,
Go ahead.
thank you. That's a great question. What brought me to where I'm at right now? I am just turned 54,
Mhm.
and I really feel like my life kind of started over when I was in my earlier 50s, like around
Mm.
50, 51, because I was diagnosed with cancer.
Mm.
And I had thyroid cancer and went through having my thyroid removed and went through having radioactive iodine therapy and all that stuff. And it really woke me up
Mhm.
and made me realize that I'm not getting any younger. And
Mm.
there are things that I have wanted to do that I kept putting off. So
Mhm.
I went back and got my MBA after I had set it aside 20 years ago. I went back
Mm.
and finished that this July.
Mm.
Um, I had worked at the same job for 12 years and decided to up and go to a completely different kind of role, but still a social worker. I'm a social worker and
Mhm.
always will be at heart. Um, but I've really woke up over this last few years. I've started my own business and am trying to help other women who have mental health struggles or struggles with neurodivergence, that kind of thing. And I don't know, it's important to me that I give back to my community.
Mm. And you mentioned um, your focus is on women regarding um, particularly just mental health or more beyond that. Do you feel that with women it's harder for them? But I just want to ask if there's a reason for that focus that you're focusing on.
That's a great question because I don't think it's harder for women. I think men have a hard time too. And men, especially, I think, have a hard time talking about mental health issues because it's kind of taboo for them to even
Yeah.
admit that. So,
Mm.
no, I think the reason I focus on women is because I am one and I understand where they're
Hmm.
coming from and I get what they're going through since I have
Hmm.
my own mental health issues. So, it's just something I can relate to.
Hmm.
So,
And
yeah.
building that rapport quickly is paramount when you're dealing with clients and you're working with clients because I could tell a person have great resource and be like, oh, this will be helpful. But if they don't trust you, if they don't know you, if they don't feel that you're going to fight for them or be there with them, it's all for naught. And it's raw. And as you know, in this field is about building relationships with these people and getting them where they need to go, wherever that is. So,
Yeah.
and
I agree 100% because if I don't trust you, I'm
mhm,
not going to believe a word you say. And
mhm,
especially if they've been through the system
mhm,
and have been turned down before or
mm,
promised things that didn't come through, that
yeah,
never proved to be true for them, then why would they trust you?
exactly. And it's also, and as you know, like resources are sometimes things change, policies change. You don't have the resources not there. It's also being able to give bad news
Yeah,
and be there with them. I think that a lot of times that's not what people do, and I feel that's where the trust goes away. The fact
right.
of the matter is, when it comes to, I think thinking about it is, I like to see it as mental health, emphasizing the health, not mental maintain. Let's not talk about let's just maintain the status quo and let's not be a burden to our families or whatever the concept is, but the actual health part. I do feel if you're in this field and you feel that the person in front of you cannot do cannot maybe exceed what you're doing or even better than what you're doing, you're in the wrong field. That's how I feel. Let's be
Yeah.
honest. If you're kind of thinking, oh, these people have mental health issues, oh, I'm just gonna help them to be manageable, you're in the wrong field. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
That's how I feel. I know that's
That's
not.
how I feel. Yeah. I feel like I want to help people thrive. I mean, I
Mm,
have bipolar disorder, but I don't let it define my whole entire
mm,
life. I know that I
mhm,
have to take my medications, I have to see my doctors,
mhm,
I've done tons of therapy. So there are
mm,
things that I do to
mhm,
keep things in check. But that
mhm,
doesn't limit me. Like I said, I just went back and got my MBA and
mm.
have a social work degree and I have tons of friends and family and you just can't let it be your whole life.
Yeah, and I feel sometimes with mental health, unfortunately, and it's not that I'm trying to pull the sales on it, but some people get stuck on their diagnosis, right? And the thing I would say is, unfortunately, I may say it's really only for treatments, the type of treatments that may work for you, and insurance. I hate to
Right.
say it, but that's it. Really, like let's
Mhm.
say you have schizoaffective schizophrenia, that opens the door for certain medication or treatments that may
Right.
be helpful. Beyond that, you're still you. You're still you. It just helps insurance companies code the service code and everything else like that, and you know this. But beyond that, and I feel bad because eventually some people, they'll read similar to like WebMD. They'll keep researching their diet,
Mhm.
especially if they're new to mental health, and they're like, "Oh, this means that. This means that." And what I always kind of feel is like you're generalizing. These are just kind of general points, but you're
Right.
still you. So, the, what I feel ultimately happens is they kind of put reset, like delete all the context of them using this general summarized thing about what may happen or may be included in the diagnosis. And that's kind of, it makes it more difficult to navigate at that point. It's like I have diagnosis now, I'm depending on this generic summary of what I have. It takes away the humanity of the person and who they
Oh,
are.
it does. It takes away the humanity and it limits them to stay in this little box
Hmm.
when there's a huge world out there for them to do whatever they want to do with it.
Yeah, and I feel, especially, you know, in the emphasis of mental health, and um, it's more important today because I feel um, we look at mental health as, oh, something. Some people may think, oh, that's something that other people have. Well, a lot of us, it's just like anything else. If you don't take care of your health, people lost a lot of people during COVID. You know, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of grief. They even added that disorder to the DSMV, the grief disorder, prolonged whatever. I know that but I feel um, if you don't, let's say, eat right, if you don't think right, if you get stuck, if these things can be problematic whether you have a diagnosed illness or not, and especially during this time of year, and there's such a saturation of information out there and so many shortcuts and that rob the individual to like what we were talking about, communicate. We go to a table, especially now with social media, no one's talking to each other in person. Like, even like talking like this is
Right.
limited. It's like through text, it's through a lot of different modes. And unfortunately, what I see is a lot of masks. We were wearing a lot of masks. And it's like the hardest mirror to look at is ourselves a lot of times. But, those who've been in recovery, those who went through medication management, which is not easy. I would say that for anyone who is watching someone take medications for mental health, their body changes, their metabolism changes, they start gaining weight, they feel horrible, people don't understand what's going on with them. They try to explain it. What usually happens? They're disappointed. The
Right.
person struggling is disappointed because no one really understands. And the fact of the matter is, no one really will. But that doesn't mean that their power's gone. That means that
Right.
they still have ability to navigate, because they're really looking for external validation so much at that point. But eventually, hopefully, they returns to their own compass and their own internal, self advocacy in that regards.
This
I know I
this
said a
kind
lot. Sorry,
This kind of makes me think of what you were saying earlier about people don't know what they're good at and like you need to tell people, "Hey,
yeah.
I noticed that you are an incredible artist," or
Hmm.
"You are really good at being supportive of people," that kind of thing. And I think people need to hear those things. And like, have you heard lately that everybody's asking ChatGPT
Hmm.
what is good about themselves?
Yeah, I heard that. Yes.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because people need to hear that.
Yeah, the other day I work outpatient, and I just one of my colleagues just wrote like this prescriber. She wrote a message, a letter. She's like, "Oh, I really appreciate the hard work you did for me when I work." Like, and for me, it meant a lot. It meant a lot because I felt like another colleague noticed my work, another colleague appreciated my work. It felt good because it felt like you were seen, heard,
Mhm.
noticed. And I feel like it's one of those things that it's so small to do. Doesn't take much
Yeah,
time, and a lot of it is true. It's just a lot of assumptions that the other person may already know. Oh, they already know. They're good. They're good at that. They should know that. Not true. A lot of times,
right.
not true at all. And um, I I I like this topic because it's so a lot of times not talked about enough. It's kind of like, well, we're just, the old, I guess the old hat version of it is like, well, don't think about your past because that was bad. Well, problem is we also have to remember our context so we can remember what we learned through those things. So sometimes when people share, especially mental health communities, oh, you guys are just in the past. No, I have to remember my context. So if I know that there's patterns to what I go through, if I notice that, hey, I'm not feeling well, I need to take a little extra time. It's just like anyone who maybe with mobility issue doesn't mean that like they take longer to get where they need to go, but they take the extra time because they know,
Right.
that if my mind gets stuck on something, I know breathing techniques, progressive relaxation, mindfulness. Sometimes is some things I will do just to kind of get myself out of myself. Some of the biggest barriers I would say, maybe you could concur is ourselves, our families sometimes. Like literally, I remember. I'll say this little story. Maybe you could. I had a client, obviously HIPAA, just like general client. Family member was there. Family member saying, "You see how much all the wrong things about this client." I'm like, "You gotta leave," and then and I talked to the client. The fact of the matter, yeah, she was right. A lot of things the client was doing some negative things. That I talked to the client's family, and really there was a release, adult, all the thing. But the point was, I told the parent, I'm like, the last thing I want this person to do is feel like they can never come back here.
Right.
The fact that you're here is because it hasn't worked. Period. So a lot of times just the old hat is like, I'm just gonna say it so many times that it's gonna change things. No, the individual has to feel, a lot of times, feel heard, feel like they're feel like their situation. As we talk about home kind of travels with you wherever you go.
Hmm.
So so the people around you. So he or she has to feel safe. And I guess when we talk about suicide, also a lot of times it's they don't feel safe in any home. The likelihood of them asking for help or even feeling comfortable enough it lowers. It could be,
Yeah.
it doesn't feel very high at that point. So,
Well,
um,
I'm
yeah,
I'm
sorry.
very blessed with a wonderful set of parents. My mom and dad are very supportive, and I have been suicidal a few times in my life, and I've attempted before. So I've had
Mm-hmm.
some very dark days.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom, luckily, has been the one that has been there going, "Don't you remember how much your kids love you? And don't you remember, the fun times we've had and this and that and this?" And I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for her reminding me of those things. So I think we have to remember that not everybody has that though. So we have to
Yeah.
try to be that for each other, whether they're family or not. When people are saying they're struggling, we have
Mm.
to realize they're not just complaining, they're
Mm-hmm.
seeking help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and mental health is messy. Let's just talk like in a sense, it's not, you know, but these things don't happen in the vacuum. People may have bad behavior just because that behavior got them what they needed at that time that they felt. So I I could understand the frustration. I also want to say for those who have parents who are not understanding about mental health, third generation that they didn't talk about it. They didn't
Right.
know. But what they do know, a lot of times from my experiences, they want the person to be better. They don't know how to communicate. They're overwhelmed. And it's just a communication, like we said, a communication
Mhm.
issue. But a lot of times they feel comforted just just feeling that they do something, and sometimes it's just defining words, defining situations, and defining maybe even that um, there's a lot of blame and a lot of shame. A lot of times associated. It may not seem it, but a lot of times parents feel that way, and then
Oh yeah.
they're like, oh, what did I do wrong, and all this stuff. So I want to say to those people struggling, also those, and to give your parents grace if you can, especially if they don't have the insight, because in their generation didn't have it. Just be
Right.
honest. But at the same time, the middle ground is just finding help, like we said before. If you're struggling, find help. But these things take, like we talk about communication. This probably will take parts. It's not a one-stop shop. You don't go there and then you're cured. There's no cure. It's just becoming something better that works around and navigates through what you're going through. It's just like if I had a drop foot or something, that a mobility issue that doesn't allow me to move the same way, doesn't mean I stop moving, right?
Right.
Just means I move differently. um I use I want to ask you, sorry, we really got in tangent, but I do like this conversation. I do like that we're presenting, because a lot of times I don't feel this is addressed enough. But I want to ask you, um building home helps remind us the importance of connecting around the connections around us. What do you think is important for us to remember when we are trying to navigate through all our failures? When we're, especially when it comes to, last month was it's okay to fall, the theme. And I feel a lot of times I like to emphasize that, failures are a lot of times looked at, especially now, um, that I'm intrinsically a failure because something didn't work out. But a lot of times, if we're thinking rationally, if I'm starting something, if I'm even skateboarding, I'm gonna fall down. That's part of it. Like, I cannot be a good skateboarder without falling down. We kind of know this, but it doesn't change with other things. Like, if I'm new to with a new mental health diagnosis, I'm not gonna get it the first time. I'm not gonna know. I
Right.
might stop making medication. I'm gonna be like, I'm fine now. I don't need anything, and it's understandable. But at the same time, if it, it's also being cognizant of what's around you, the environment, and what is actually helping you. Is it more important that other people feel that you are doing well, or that you actually are? And I feel, just a side note, that part of that is how mental health started in the 1900s, when we think about
Hmm.
how the emphasis was on, not the patient or the client. It was more about how the family felt around, so they kind of put them in these places. But I think the stigma started from treatment. I know we learned a lot, and we've come a long way, but there's still a lot to go. So I know, backtracking to the actual question, what do you think is important for us to remember when we try to navigate through our failures?
Through failures. I think that we need to start this when children are very young in school and even
Mm-hmm.
in their homes. We need to
Mm-hmm.
teach people that it's okay to fail and that
Mm-hmm.
failing is a step in the process to learning.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, I would say that one thing that has helped me a great deal is focusing on gratitude and what am I
Mm-hmm.
grateful for in my life. And so when I'm thinking about how everything is negative and my life is not going the way I planned, or maybe I lost my job, or something like that, I have to find something that I'm grateful for. And I try to
Mm-hmm.
journal that every day.
Another thing that has helped me, especially if I'm angry at a situation or worried about a situation, is remember the people and their like who they are. So if it doesn't match, pause a bit. So this person said something, didn't sound right to me. I'm upset. It could happen in Thanksgiving. It's a powder keg. We know this. But the thing is, if this person is generally a supporter for you, is generally nice and always comforting, you the most I would say I would do is to have that conversation. This didn't sound right to me, or when it's appropriate. However, also give credit where credit's due. If the person has been supportive, don't automatically feel like, I don't know if you remember the prequels of Star Wars. You're either with me or against me. Like, all of a
Hmm.
sudden, when he knew Obi-Wan all this time, the whole thing was Obi-Wan was a friend. He forgot that Obi-Wan was a friend. So don't forget your parents, who they are, your friends. Don't immediately say, oh, they said something that I didn't agree with, right? And what didn't feel right. So all the characteristics, all the context, all those times that you spent with them go away. I encourage you not to do that. I encourage you to take the
Right.
time to reflect. I encourage you time to make the effort to communicate. And if it does bother you, communicate it. That's what friendships and relationships are. It's a constant pulling. You know, it is that ebb and flow of needs versus also communicating those needs and understanding and building that. And you go through that a lot of times. I find the relationship strengthens because now there's a little bit more openness and transparency. You
Oh,
know.
I 100% agree. You said earlier that relationships are a lot of work, and they are. I was talking earlier about how my mom and I are so close, and she's been so pivotal in my life. And so you would think that we've always been that way, and we have not.
Mm-hmm.
We struggled through my teenage years and my early 20s, and we did not get along.
Mm-hmm.
And I, like I said, have done a lot of therapy, and that has taught me to communicate better with her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she realized when I did that, that she didn't realize how some of the things she was saying to me were how I was taking them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we both had to learn to communicate better with each other.
Yeah, and I feel it, even like I would say the hardest things that we go through, like these things. There's a healthy, I would say, healthy stress, healthy tension. Like,
Hmm.
a lot of times we look at stress as negative. I feel like the whole like extremes give a missed opportunity about stress. I get stressed when I got married. I guess these kind of things are healthy stress.
Hmm.
So whenever you make a big monumental, you're gonna have stress. So it's not avoiding stress; it's managing it,
Right.
navigating through it. You're gonna have stress, and I think sometimes the things that are most worth fighting for are gonna be hard. They're gonna, those are, and part of that, especially this time of year, because you're gonna be around people. Those who are listening, maybe around people, or even if you're not, the people that surround you daily, or the people you talk to at the store, whoever that is, communication is part of that. So
Right.
so I would encourage, to because it's hard. Don't let it dissuade you because it's hard. Look at the character person that's in front of you. A lot of times when I think about mental health and the gap between generations, a lot of times get to the derivative. The derivative is the reason you're here, and you don't understand what your granddaughter, son, or whatever's going on with them, but you care about them. You want them to be
Right.
better. Let's just focus there. Let's not talk about everything else. Last, kind of as we wrap up, I want to ask you. I said this before. Are we allowed to get better? What do you hope people listening will remember in regards to this month? Well, in the idea or the concept of building a home, what would you want people, if you could kind of sum it up in your own words? What's building a home? What would you like people to remember?
I think building a home is different for everybody, but it basically is building relationships
Mm-hmm.
with either friends or family or neighbors
Mm-hmm.
or coworkers. I have coworkers that are family to me that I've worked with for 12 years, and I know their life story just like they know mine.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's about who you surround yourself with and what you think is important.
Yeah, and I think also, as we wrap up the final thought, I think sometimes, especially people who've been through abusive relationships, people who've been through a lot or trauma, sometimes the old hat is just get friends. That's not usually the case. I would say find a community, a positive one.
Hmm.
You know, Friends will come. Like it doesn't have to rush into it. A lot of times, like people who experience trauma or abuse are like, well, the only way I won't be lonely is to be in a friendship, or no, just find a community that you feel safe in. Sometimes there's a lot of different grassroots nonprofit organizations that can help, especially women who experience domestic violence or something. I know around my area will be Betty Griffin house. They kind of help sometimes shelter women who experience that. But wherever you are around the world, if you are struggling and you're just, you've been through something rough, it's like the old advice that we know is bad. It's like you just got in a bad breakup. The worst thing you can do a lot of times is get to another relationship. Maybe you just need to kind of find a community, heal a little bit, like learn, grow, heal some more. And then if someone comes along the way, you'll be ready. You'll be more ready
Right.
than you were if you just rushed into it. So those are the final thoughts. It's okay to, it kind of mirrors grief. It takes the time it takes. Don't rush it. And any final thoughts as we wrap up?
Just that I agree with you. I think that seeking friendship and community is important. And nowadays, with technology, I
Mm,
belong to some Facebook groups that are private groups that like are for parents of other parents that have kids with autism, and I find them very supportive, and I go to
mm,
them when I'm struggling, that kind of thing. So
mm.
I mean, there's so many places, so many resources to get community nowadays.
Yes, and I think there's probably an influx of it because there's a real need of it. Especially nowadays. I want to say thank you so much, Amy, coming on and sharing your insight. I just want to say it's always a privilege to have guests that are willing. It's not easy to be on podcasts and sharing. Most people don't like to be up front. I'm kind of weird. I'm okay with it, but at the same time, I also know that it's also hard to share. Even though I'm okay with being up front, it's one thing to just talk about anything, sports or whatever you're interested in. It's another thing to talk about these topics that are a little bit, usually sometimes unfortunately gets pushed under the rug or gets kind of sidetracked. It's okay to not be okay. The old slogan. It's okay that things may take longer. And when I ask the question, "Are you allowed to get better?" That also means you may need to say no to things. Don't commit to a million things. Don't save the world, not yourself. Find ways to kind of take more time. And again, thank you, Amy, for coming on and sharing your insight and having a conversation with me.
Oh,
Um,
thank you for having me. It was really a nice conversation.
I wanted to share with those who are listening. ReviveMinistryFL.com is our website. I'll leave you with this last quote from Mother Teresa. She says, "The most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved."